In this video, I'm going to present the third of my four arguments against materialism and for Panentheism. I call this the argument from comparative perception. Many years ago, the biologist Jacob von Uexküll asked us to consider the lowly tick. A tick, Uexküll pointed out, has four senses. She can sense light on her back with something called Haller's organ at the end of her feet. She can detect carbon dioxide breathed out by animals and butyric acid given off by mammals' sebaceous glands, their sweat glands. She can sense temperatures in a narrow range around 37 degrees centigrade, the temperature of mammalian blood. She can feel with the little hairs on her legs. That's it. That's the entire access to the universe of a tick. But it enables a tick to do what a tick needs to do. Here's the original passage from von Uexküll. This eyeless animal finds the way to her watch point at the top of a tall blade of grass, with the help of only its skin's general sensitivity to light. The approach of her prey becomes apparent to this blind and deaf bandit only through her sense of smell. The odor of butyric acid, which emanates from the sebaceous follicles of all mammals, works on the tick as a signal that causes her to abandon her post on top of the blade of grass and fall blindly downward toward her prey. If she is fortunate enough to fall on something warm, which she perceives by means of an organ sensible to a precise temperature, then she has attained her prey, the warm-blooded animal, and thereafter needs only the help of her sense of touch to find the least hairy spot possible and embed herself up to her head in the cutaneous tissue of her prey. She can now slowly suck up a stream of warm blood. Now, imagine that it's raining in the universe of Uexküll's tick. For the tick, there is no sound of the rain, no view of the rain, and barely any smell or feeling of the rain. For us humans, rain brings a delightful sound and can be breathtakingly beautiful to look upon. See my poem about this. I've included a link in the comments below. For us, rain brings distinctive smells caused by the increase of ozone in the air and by the fresh, earthy smell of petrichor, the smell given off by dampened earth and rock, and geosmin, the smell given off by certain bacteria loosened from the soil. The tick might be able to sense the increase in ozone, but that's it. For the tick, it's raining means there's this welling up against the hairs of its legs as the water accumulates. That's it. Well, there might be that smell of ozone. But that's all it's raining means in the universe of the tick. Von Uexküll calls the world inhabited by the tick its Umwelt. And it's not the world we inhabit. It's a world totally alien to us. Here's a like situation. In a justly famous essay, the American philosopher Thomas Nagel asks us to consider what it is like to be a bat. Here's Nagel. So, if extrapolation from our own case is involved in the idea of what it's like to be a bat, the extrapolation must be incompletable. We cannot form more than a schematic conception of what it's like. For example, we may ascribe general types of experience on the basis of the animal's structure and behavior. Thus, we describe bats' sonar as a form of three-dimensional forward perception. We believe that bats feel some versions of pain, fear, hunger, and lust, and that they have other more familiar types of perception besides sonar. But we believe that these experiences also have in each case a specific subjective character which it is beyond our ability to conceive. And if there is conscious life elsewhere in the universe, it is likely that some of it will not be describable even in the most general experiential terms available to us. The problem is not confined to exotic cases, however, for it exists between one person and another. The subjective character of the experience of a person deaf and blind from birth is not accessible to me, for example, nor presumably is mine to him. This does not prevent us each from believing that the other's experience has such a subjective character. Okay. Comparative study of the cognitive capabilities, sensory organs, and behavior of other creatures tells us that each inhabits its own subset of the universe that it takes for the universe as a whole, because any creature's sensory envelope is for it a totality. The Umwelten, the worlds of each creature, differ. In other words, ticks and bats teach us that it is inevitable that given the particular sensory apparatus and cognitive makeup that a creature has, given a particular creature's operating system, some of what actually exists in the world will be available to that creature, and some will not. Perhaps a lot will not. Consider the electromagnetic spectrum, which runs from lower to higher wavelengths and frequency, from radio waves to microwaves to infrared radiation to visible light to ultraviolet to X-rays and finally gamma rays. For almost all of hominid existence on this planet, we were unaware of most of this spectrum, completely blind to it. Socrates was bathed in his walks around Athens in radio waves and microwaves and infrared radiation and ultraviolet radiation and X-rays and gamma rays from the sun. But he was totally unaware of this, of what was all around him. He could feel the infrared radiation, of course, and the ultraviolet when it sunburned him, but he couldn't see it. So, what was he aware of? According to the National Nuclear Security Agency of the U.S. Department of Energy, quote, the entire rainbow of radiation observable to the human eye only makes up a tiny portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, about 0.0035%. To get a sense of the size of that, if the entire electromagnetic spectrum were the distance from Boston to LA, the part that we can see, would be about the size of a city block. Butterflies, scorpions, sockeye salmon, cats, dogs, hedgehogs, bumblebees, and reindeer can see ultraviolet light. Many snakes and fish can see infrared radiation. So can bats. So, alas, can mosquitoes and bedbugs, the better to hone in on you. Wolves have special receptors on the tips of their noses sensitive to infrared radiation. Humans have 3 types of photoreceptors in our retinas for red, green, and blue light, combinations of which enable us to see about 10 million distinct colors. Some humans, however, have 4 different types of photoreceptors. These tetrachromats, mostly women, and about 12% of those, can see 10 times as many different colors as the rest of us do, about 100 million. Imagine that. There are people walking around who can see 90 million more colors than you can. Many animals have only 2 kinds of photoreceptors. Mantis shrimp have between 12 and 16 different photoreceptors, but don't do color discrimination and see only 12 to 16 colors. Many birds and insects have 4 color receptors, which enables them to see millions of colors that we can't. Zebrafish have 5 to 7 different color receptors, different types of receptors, and so might be able to see billions of colors that we can't. Movies work for us because beyond about 72 frames per second, changes in the visual field before us blur together, and the still frames seem continuous. That's how movies work. Flies and hummingbirds and many other creatures process changes in the visual field much, much more quickly, at something like 300 frames per second. So, to a hummingbird or fly, a movie made for humans is like a slideshow. The measly 12 million olfactory receptors in a human take up the space of a postage stamp. The 40 times as many in a dog take up the space of a pocket handkerchief, and dogs are estimated to have 10 million times the ability to sense and discriminate smells that humans do. 10 million times the ability. We live in a visually rich world. The world of smell, for a dog, is that rich, that complex. What is it like to inhabit the dog world with a smell field as rich as the human visual field is to us? We have no idea. Our best friend is an alien with a totally different kind of, quote, vision, end quote. Now, suppose that a tick happens to find itself drowning in a rainstorm. The tick has no idea what phenomenon is causing this. It has almost no access to rain. It can't see it, can't hear it, can barely smell it. There are explanations for phenomena experienced by the tick to which the tick hasn't the cognitive or perceptual wherewithal to understand. Clearly, the same is true for us. We're just like ticks in this regard, as is demonstrated by the examples of other creatures with different kinds of access and by our own changing access over time via the building of prostheses, such as spectroscopes and electron microscopes and superconducting supercolliders, these instruments that expand the reach of our senses. At any given time, there is much that we simply cannot directly perceive and immediately understand because we haven't the perceptual or other cognitive tools to do so. We are, of course, existence proof that certain complexly interacting physical systems are loci of qualia, mattering, agency, purpose, freedom, what Sartre referred to as non-positional reflective being, contents of consciousness, situatedness, thrownness, fallenness, orientation to others, mind. But the comparative anatomy of creatures with differing Umwelten teaches us that we cannot expect that we have easy access to the underlying phenomena that gives rise to these. The perceptual psychologist Donald Hoffman, who also studied quantum physics, puts it this way. The Umwelt of a particular creature, a tick, a bat, us, is an interface to the underlying reality. An interface. You look at your computer screen and you see a recycle bin and folders and document icons. But there is no recycle bin. There are no folders and documents inside your computer, obviously. The underlying reality is something different. The folders and document icons and recycle bin, those are simply created by the operating system as an interface for interacting with the underlying reality, easily interacting with it. Our perceptions are the same. In other words, the tick teaches us that it is inevitable that given the particular sensory apparatus and cognitive makeup that a creature has, given a particular creature's operating system, some of what actually exists will be available to that creature and some will not. This is an inductive conclusion strongly warranted by our knowledge of comparative neural and perceptual physiology, so strongly warranted, in fact, that we are compelled to accept it on purely inductive empirical scientific grounds. And it's a truly mind-blowing conclusion. If you actually think about this, it's mind-blowing. Kant came to the same conclusion. We do not have straightforward access, he says, to the noumenon, to ultimate reality, to things as they are in themselves. We have access only to our limited perceptions of them, to phenomena, and to what we can puzzle out about the innate structures of our own experiencing, what Kant calls categories. The differing perceptual and cognitive setups of creatures different from us teach us that we don't have the full access pass. It therefore seems highly likely that Hamlet was right when he said, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." In other words, there is a vast unseen, a vast unseeable, in fact, or currently unseeable. Before I end this talk, let me deal with a particular objection to this line of reasoning. The objection goes like this. Evolution designs creatures to exploit whatever realities there are, and over time they exploit them more fully, and so we reach this pinnacle in humans at which we have cognitive and perceptual access to the way things are. Now, here's where I think that argument is wrong. Anthropocentric arguments tend to be downright silly. They are akin to the old ideas that the Earth and humans were at the center of the universe. Evolution is nothing if not parsimonious. It reaches for what works for survival value in a niche, and it ignores everything else. And it gives creatures just what they need and nothing more for survival in that niche. Phenotypes, body plans, including the plans of our perceptual and cognitive apparatuses, tend to be local maxima on the larger fitness landscape. We have access to our Umwelt. We do not usually have direct access to the underlying reality, though, as we saw in the argument from science video against materialism and for pantheism, we have built prostheses, both physical and mathematical, in the form of well-established theory that our underlying realities include insubstantial matter, vast amounts of unaccounted for energy in the vacuum, and consciousness that is required for the collapse of the wave functions into something substantial. Put that word substantial in quotation marks, like a particle. We don't usually have direct access to the underlying reality, but we are also questioning creatures. We want to lift the hood, and that's what the next video in this series is about. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell for future updates. Share this and other videos in this series with friends and family, and thank you for listening. Peace and love and meaning to you and yours.